जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी। जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। यशोदनंदन व्रज जन रंजना। यशोदनंदन व्रज जन रंजना। यमुना तीरावनचारी। यमुना तीरावनचारी। जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी। जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी। यशोदनंदन व्रज जन रंजना। यमुना तीरावनचारी। यमुना तीरावनचारी। जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी। जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी। जय कृष्ण रुक्मिणी जय सत्यभामा। कृष्ण रुक्मिणी जय सत्यभामा। जय गौरनिताय जय गौरनिताय। गौरनिताय जय गौरनिताय। जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 प्रभुपाद। जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद इस डिवाइन ग्रेस विश्वगुरु एसी भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी शील प्रभुपाद की जय। Jai Vishnupat Paramahansa Parivrajakaacharya Ashtottara Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Grantharaj Srimad-Bhagavatam Ki Jai Shri Shri Krishna Rukmani Satyabhama Ki Jai Shri Shri Gaur Nitai Ki Jai Vishwaguru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 26, Fundamental Principles of Material Nature, verses 23 and 24. Mahat Tattvad Vikurvanat Mahat Tattvad Vikurvanat Mahat Tattvad Vikurvanat Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat Kriya Shakti Ahankaraha Kriya Shaktir Ahankaras Kriya Shaktir Ahankaras Tri Vidha Samapadyata Trividha Samapadyata Trividha Samapadyata Mahattattvad Vikurvanat Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat Kriya Shaktir Ahankaras Trividha Samapadyata Mahattattvad Vikurvanat Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat Kriya Shaktir Ahankaras Trividha Samapadyata
Mahattattvad Vikurvanat Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat Kriya Shaktir Ahankaras Trividha Samapadyata
Mahattattvad Vikurvanat Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat Kriya Shaktir Ahankaras Trividha Samapadyata
Mahattattvad Vikurvanat Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat Kriya Shaktir Ahankaras Trividha Samapadyata.
That was verse 23. 24 I'll read by myself. Vaikarikas taijasascha tamasascha yato bhavaha manasascha indriyanam cha bhutanam mahatam api. Word to word meaning. Mahat tattvat, from the Mahat tattva. Vikurvanat, undergoing a change. Bhagavat Virya Sambhavat, evolved from the Lord's own energy. Kriya Shakti, endowed with active power. Ahankaraha, the material ego. Trividha, of the three kinds. Samapadyata, sprang up. Vaikarikaha, material ego in transformed goodness. Taijasaha, material ego in passion. Cha, and tamasaha, material ego in ignorance. Cha, also, yataha, from which, bhavaha, the origin, manasaha, of the mind, cha, and indriyana, of the senses for perception and action, cha, and bhutanam mahatam, of the five gross elements, api, also. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. The material ego springs up from the Mahat Tattva, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of three kinds: good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these three types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. Kindly repeat. The material ego springs up from the Mahat Tattva, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of three kinds: good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these three types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the beginning, from clear consciousness or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. This is called false ego, or identification of the body as self. The living entity exists in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, but he has marginal independence, and this allows him to forget Krishna. Originally, pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, there is a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. In the Upanishads, it is stated, therefore, that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. The example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Not only must one come to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. We cannot argue about why false ego arises from pure consciousness. Factually, there is always the chance that this will happen, and therefore, one has to be very careful. False ego is the basic principle for all material activities which are executed in the modes of material nature. As soon as one deviates from pure Krishna consciousness, he increases his entanglement in material reaction. The entanglement of materialism is the material mind, and from the material mind, the senses and the material organs become manifest. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Ninnitinamine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mokam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yat kripatamaham mande Shri Gurum Dina Taranam. Recently we had recently we had some requirement of recruiting some people for the temple. We wanted some plumbers and some electricians and stuff like that. So our agent came and he was telling we should take a subscription for a job portal where employers can, there are many job portals. There is Naukri, there is Foundit, so many are there. So he was saying he came up with a particular name which I had not heard before. He was saying on this portal we'll find commonly people of blue collar category, those people you will find easily. So can we take a subscription? So you see this job portal business is quite a when I got out of college and when we, from that time, 1990s, if you had to look for a job, you take the newspaper and there will be so many vacancy classified advertisements, and then you start approaching them. That used to be the thing. Now with the advent of internet, now slowly over a period of time, many portals have developed. They have huge databases, and anybody wants to post his resume on that, he has to pay a certain fee. Any employer wants to go through the database and look for some people, they have to subscribe. So good money-making business. You act as the interface between those seeking jobs and those seeking people to employ. And so many companies, many employers will be subscribing to these job portals. They have different schemes. You can subscribe for 1 week, you can subscribe for 1 month, you can subscribe for 6 months, you can subscribe for 1 year. All kinds of options are available. And most companies, they will all subscribe to these, one or the other of these job portals. So in a company, when anybody joins a company, the company doesn't want the employee to leave, isn't it? They want the employees to stay. But still, they will go and subscribe with a job portal like this, so that to database, whenever they need people, they can recruit people. Why? Because although you have the company doesn't want the people to leave, and the company has a contract with the employee that you have to work for so many hours per day, you'll be paid this much per month, and if you have to leave the job, you should give so many months notice. All these things are there. So there is a contract. I'm paying you a certain money and you have to do this job for me. But still, although the person has committed that yes, he will work dedicatedly for the company, still there is all can time leave the organization. So there is no person will stay. Therefore, the companies have to have some subscription like this, backup plan, so that when somebody leaves, they can get a new person. So, although there is a, if I may use the word, servant-employer relationship, although there is that relationship, not in a negative sense, but in terms of describing the relationship. There is a person who is rendering service, and there is a person who is receiving the service. Although there is a written contract signed off between both parties, still the person who is rendering the service, the servant, he can any time decide that no, I don't want to continue, I want to quit and go somewhere else. This is This is a, we all take it for granted. This is the way it is. So actually, if you see, originally, every living entity, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Mamayavamsho Jivaloke Jivabhutas Sanatana, we are all eternal of Krishna. So in our original consciousness, as it was described in the previous verse to what we are discussing today, previous two verses, the original consciousness is like water which is coming down through the rain. It is completely distilled water, completely pure. But although the consciousness in that state of clear consciousness or pure consciousness, we are completely aware that yes, I am spirit soul, I am part and parcel of Krishna. My original constitutional position is Swarupa. My original constitutional position is to be a servant of Krishna. I am supposed to serve Krishna. Krishna is supposed to be the beneficiary of my service. He is supposed to receive all my service. This is my constitutional position. Although in our pure state of consciousness, we know this fully well, we are conscious of this, and we are situated in that, still, at some point of time, there is the possibility that the living entity can develop an independent desire and want to leave that service. Just like the employee in the company, he is working, he is getting paid. But there is no guarantee any moment that employee has the independence that he can quit. He can leave the company and job and go. Similarly, a jiva engaged in Krishna's service also has that independence that he can leave Krishna's service if he so wishes. This is called free will. And all those living entities who misuse that free will are put into this material world. Krishna describes this in the Bhagavad Gita. Ichha dvesha samuttena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani sammoham sarge yanti parattapa. Sarga means this material creation. Sarge yanti. So the living entities come into this material world. How do they come into this material world? Sammoham, sarva bhutani sammoham sarge yanti parantapa. So under illusion, when they come under the influence of illusion, they come to this material world. How do they come under illusion? Because the consciousness is pure. Just like you collect the water coming down in the rain in a beaker and you test it, it will be as pure as distilled water. So how does the living entity whose consciousness is pure like that distilled water, how does he come under illusion? Somebody who is a living entity who is supposed to be in pure consciousness is supposed to be beyond the influence of the three modes of material nature. He is supposed to be beyond the influence of illusion in this material world. So how does the living entity fall under illusion? That Krishna says, Ichha dvesha samuttena. When we develop the ichha, the desire, and dvesha, we develop a opposite approach. We don't want something. Ichha means we want something, dvesha means we don't want something. So both things, when ichha dvesha samuttena, when the living entity becomes captivated by a desire to possess or to have something, and dvesha, he doesn't want something, then what happens? Ichha dvesha samuttena dvandva mohena bharata. He comes under the influence of duality. He becomes influenced by the duality of ichha and dvesha, desire and hatred. So what is this desire? Ichha. What does he want? He wants independence. He wants to enjoy independent of Krishna. He wants to enjoy like Krishna. That is the ichha. That is the positive desire. And what does he want to avoid? What is the dvesha? What does he want to avoid? He wants to avoid Shri Krishna Rukmani Satyabhama ki jai. He wants to avoid serving Krishna. He wants to avoid being subordinate to Krishna. So this Ichcha and Dvesha, Ichcha, positive desire to become the controller, to become the enjoyer, and Dvesha, the desire to avoid being subordinate to Krishna. Because of these two things, what happens when one's heart becomes captivated by this Ichcha and Dvesha, by this desire and hatred, what happens? We come down to this material world. We fall under the control of illusion that I am the controller. So, the origin of the living entities falling down into the material world, it is described by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita in this verse. Sarge yanti, they come down to this material world. What is the cause of the living entities coming down to the material world? The living entities desire to enjoy and the desire to not become subordinate to Krishna. So because of these two things, one is a positive, one is a negative, want and not want. And because of that, he comes under the influence of illusion and he comes down to the material world. So, and that same thing is being stated here. Mahattattvad vikurvanad bhagavat virya sambhavat. The material ego, mahattattva vikurvanad. The material ego springs up from the mahattattva. Mahattattva vikurvanad bhagavat virya sambhavat. So how does material ego become manifest from the mahattattva? Bhagavad virya sambhavat. Virya means the generating potency. Generally, when we say virya in the material terms, it refers to the semen of the male species. But in the case of the Supreme Lord, when we speak of virya, it does not refer to the reproduction in the material sense. In the case of the Supreme Lord, when we say Bhagavad Virya, the Virya means the energy, the creative energy, the ability or the energy of the Lord, the Shakti, the energy of Krishna, which brings about creation. Normally, in the material world, when we speak of creation or giving birth to living entities, there is only one way which we know, which is by the intercourse between the male and the female. That's how the reproductory system works. But in the case of the Supreme Lord Krishna, he does not have to take such a process to create. Just like Prabhupada gives the example, Vishnu was lying on Ananta Shesha. Kshirodaka Sai Vishnu was lying on Ananta Shesha. Lakshmi Devi was massaging his feet. But without taking the help of Lakshmi Devi, from Vishnu's navel, one lotus sprouted, and on that Brahma was born. That is why Brahma is called Swayambhu, because he was not born from a mother like normally all of us are born. So, Vishnu gave birth to Brahma simply by his desire, simply by his Kriya Shakti, by his potency which can create. So within the stem of that lotus, all the 14 planetary systems are distributed. So how did the 14 planetary systems come into being? Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat. The Vishnu's Virya, his creative energy, brought about that creation. Simply by willing, the Supreme Lord brings about all creation possible. This is possible only for the Supreme Lord, for Krishna. So, Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat, from the Lord's own energy, Mahattattva Vikurvanat, material ego springs up from Kriya Shaktir Ahankaraha. The material ego springs up, and the material ego is endowed with active power. Kriya Shakti. Active power means when the material ego possesses a living entity, he wants to engage in activity. He is impelled to act in particular ways. So, the Kriya Shakti, the active power which makes ahankara, false ego, to act is of three kinds. Trividaha samapadyata. So what are those three kinds? Vaikarikaha, Taijasaha, Tamasaha. material ego in goodness, Sattoguna, passion, which is Rajoguna, and that is Taijasa, and Tamoguna, Tamasaha. So in these three, when the material ego is endowed with these three active powers, what happens with these three kinds of active powers? The living entity, who is originally in pure consciousness, because of Ichcha Dvesha Samuttena, because of desire and hatred, he comes to this material world. And Sammoham, he comes under the influence of illusion. Sarge Yanti, he comes into this material world. Then what happens is, when he comes into the material world, consciousness gets contaminated. So in the beginning, we saw when the material creation, Mahatattva, had pure consciousness. But the moment it gets mixed with the three modes of material nature, it becomes contaminated. And in that contaminated state, what happens? The consciousness comes under the influence of material ego in three kinds. So the material ego, ahankara or false ego, it becomes endowed with active energy of three kinds: Vaikarika, Tamasa, and Taijasa. So when it endowed with these three kinds of active power, the living entity who has come into this material world, and because of the contamination of the pure consciousness by the three modes of material nature within the Mahatattva, the living entity engages in activities according to those three modes. We see in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks of the different influences of the three modes of material nature in the latter half of the Bhagavad Gita. So there, Krishna speaks about what kinds of food the living entity likes. If his false ego is contaminated by the mode of goodness, he likes a certain kind of foodstuff. Foodstuff which is in the mode of goodness, milk, dairy products, sweets. These are the things which attract a person. When a person his false ego is contaminated with the mode of passion, then what happens? Vaikarikaha Taijasaha. When his material ego is driven by the active power of Taijasa or Rajoguna, what happens? He likes food is very spicy, which will create a lot of trouble for the body, which will eventually lead to a lot of diseases, ama. And then there is food which is in the category of Tamasa, which is when the false ego is contaminated by the active energy of Tamasa. What happens? He likes food which is putrefied, decaying, meaning dead and meat, non-vegetarian foodstuff. These things become attractive to the person. You see, even the food we like is determined by which mode, which Kriya Shakti, which active energy of the Mahatattva is influencing our ego, ahankara. The food, the kind of activity we engage in, the kind of faith we have, all these things are determined by the influence of these three things. But what do we think when we are influenced by that mode? We think this is my desire. This is Sarvabhutani Sammoham Sarge Yanti Parantapa. Krishna says this is the illusion. We think I have become independent. But what is the reality? Reality is, in the spiritual world, in pure consciousness, we are fully aware that yes, I am subordinate. I am not fully independent. I am subordinate to Krishna. I am an amsha of Krishna. I am part and parcel of Krishna. We are fully aware of that. Because, as we have seen in the previous verse, the nature of pure consciousness, that it's very clear. Clarity of vision, of perception, is a characteristic of pure consciousness. So we are very clear, I am subordinate, I can never become independent. But when our consciousness becomes contaminated, then what happens? Mahatattva vikurvanat, kriya shakti ahankaras trivida samapadyata. When our consciousness becomes contaminated like this, what happens? Then we start thinking, oh, I am enjoying. But what is the reality? The three modes of material nature are actually dictating. You like this kind of food, you like this kind of activity, you like this kind of sleep, you have this kind of faith. All these things are being dictated to us. So we are not independent. We are totally dependent. So now the question comes that how can sometimes some devotees, bring up this question. How can a living entity who is in pure consciousness, how can he come under the influence of the three modes of material nature? Prabhupada is saying here, we cannot argue about why false ego arises from pure consciousness. Factually, there is always the chance that this will happen, and therefore one has to be very careful. So, we have to understand that even if we become a pure devotee, even if we go back to the spiritual world, we have to be careful not to misuse our free will. So, when we speak of pure devotee, there are two kinds of pure devotee. One is the pure devotee who will never fall down. Now, Prabhupada also, when in multiple places, told all my devotees, all my disciples are pure devotees. And Prabhupada said, as long as you are following the rules and regulations strictly, you are also pure devotee. Right? All these kind of statements. So generally what happens is, these kind of statements are taken up and they are said, see, Prabhupada told his disciples are pure devotees, so they can become gurus. The thing is, there are two kinds of pure devotees. One is, a person is called pure when he does not engage in any sinful activity. He is always engaged in pure activities. This is one kind of pure devotee. Another kind of pure devotee is, he can purify anybody he comes in touch with. Prabhupada is that kind of pure devotee. Anybody comes in touch with Prabhupada, Prabhupada will purify him. We are not that kind of pure devotee. That's why Prabhupada says, as long as you are following all the rules and regulations, you are also pure devotee. So we are pure because we are not engaging in sinful activity. You understand? So, the function of a spiritual master is to purify the conditioned souls who come and take shelter of him. So, the first kind of pure devotee, who is pure because he does not engage in sinful activity, cannot perform the function of a spiritual master. Spiritual master has to be performed by a pure devotee who has the power to purify whoever comes in touch with him without himself getting contaminated. That's a different level. That's a different kind of pure devotee. So therefore, when we say that a spiritual master has to be pure devotee, he has to be the pure devotee of the second kind, who can purify whomever he comes in touch with. So, because we may be, when we start engaging in devotional service, we start following all the regulatory principles and all that, we may keep ourselves pure. But then, as Prabhupada is mentioning in the purport, Kshurasya dhara nishita duratyaya durgam pataste. So, the path of spiritual life is very, very dangerous, very, very risky. Kshurasya dhara, it's like a Kshurasya dhara. Kshura means a shaving blade. So, a shaving blade has to be very sharp if you have to get a neat shave. Now that sharp shaving blade, when you are shaving yourself, you have to be very conscious, you have to be very cautious. Little bit inattention, if you start thinking of something, looking somewhere else and shaving yourself, what will happen? You will draw blood. You will cut yourself. You will injure yourself. You will harm yourself. So, therefore, the Shastra state, although you may have become pure in the sense that you are no more engaged in sinful activity, still you have to be very careful, because the propensity or the propensity to misuse our free will still exists. So that's why Prabhupada says in the purport, in the Upanishads it is stated therefore that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. Kshurasya dhara nishita duratyaya durgam pataste kavayo viduhu. So the example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Therefore, although we may have risen to the platform of keeping ourselves pure, we take Diksha from Prabhupada, we accept Prabhupada as our Diksha Guru, we take initiation from him. What happens? Prabhupada takes away all our past karma. So we have become pure. And we keep ourselves pure by not engaging in by avoiding the 4 regulative principles. No meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling, no illicit sex. So if we avoid these things, what happens? We are keeping ourselves pure. Now, if we are little inattentive, what will happen? Again, we will engage in the sinful activities, purity is gone. This is the word of caution which the Upanishads are giving and Prabhupada is giving. But once one becomes a sadhana siddha, one comes to the state of purity where one is able to purify everything one comes in touch with. There is no question of being contaminated oneself. Then that state is possible to achieve when we go back to Godhead. So in that state, there one can freely give shelter to other contaminated souls and purify them. Like Narada Muni. Narada Muni in his previous life, as a maidservant son, he had darshan of Vishnu. That means he had become that much qualified, he had risen to that level of purity. To be a person who is contaminated consciousness, he cannot have darshan of Vishnu, not possible. So he had risen to that level of purity, but he still did not act as a spiritual master in that life. Next life, he became a sadhana siddha, then he started acting as a spiritual master. Of course, on the order of his father, his spiritual master, Brahma. Again, even for that pure devotee to act as a spiritual master, there has to be an order from the predecessor spiritual master. Without that, even though you are qualified, that without that order from the predecessor spiritual master, nobody can act as spiritual master. That is also there. These are all conditions which need to be met. You see, there are, in science, we talk about essential conditions to be met, and there is a sufficient condition to be met. For a particular event to happen, essential conditions may be all there, but if the sufficient condition is not there, that event will not take place. Right? So, the essential conditions are many. One has to be qualified, one must be a devotee, one must be initiated by a bona fide spiritual master, one must be connected to the parampara. These are all essential conditions, but these are not sufficient in themselves. What is the sufficient condition? The sufficient condition is that one must be ordered by one's predecessor, spiritual master, to become guru. Unless that order is there, all other conditions may be satisfied. One spiritual master may have disappeared. All these conditions are met, but sufficient condition, order from the predecessor spiritual master is not there. Then even though all other essential conditions are satisfied, one cannot act as spiritual master. So, Narada Muni, on the order of Brahma, he became a spiritual master after he attained the stage of sadhana siddha. So therefore, you see, what are the kind of people whom Narada Muni has delivered? You look at Valmiki Rishi, he was a dacoit in his previous life. You look at Mrigari, he was a hunter who was half killing animals. By coming in touch with people, such people, Narada Muni did not become contaminated. Those contaminated people, the souls, they become purified. That is the kind of pure devotee who can act as a spiritual master. So, as long as we are not on that platform, there is always the chance that we can misuse our free will and come back to the material world again. Therefore, Prabhupada is giving that word of caution, quoting from the Upanishads, Kshorasya Dhara, that we have to be very, very careful. We should not think that now I come into spiritual life, I am initiated by Prabhupada, I am initiated by somebody else, XYZ, and I am following all the regulative principles, so now I can become spiritual master. No. Our position is to maintain our purity, go back to Godhead, and then after that, if Krishna orders, if the spiritual master orders, then we can act as spiritual master, not otherwise. So this we have to understand carefully. These are all the traps of Maya, which we should not fall into. And so therefore, Mahattattva Vikurvana Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat. From the Lord's own creative energy, the material ego springs up from the Mahattattva. And Kriya Shaktir Ahankaras, and that Ahankara, material ego, is endowed with active power. Kriya Shakti, which is also coming from Krishna. Externally it appears false ego is working automatically. It is influencing us automatically. Nothing is working automatically. Because that false ego actually is matter, right? And matter by itself has no power to move anything. It has no active power imbibed in it. You keep a dead piece of stone here, millions of years it will remain there. It will not move. But you see, ahankara, false ego, although it is material, it has got the ability to make us think and act in particular ways. So where is this power to move, power to bring about activity coming in false ego? False ego is material, so that also has to be inactive. That is coming from Bhagavad Virya Sambhavat Kriya Shaktir Ahankaras Trividas Samapadyata. That is coming from the Kriya Shakti of Krishna, which influences that ahankara, endows that ahankara with the active power, ability to influence and influence the living entity to act in particular ways. Influence it can penetrate the consciousness of the jiva. The original spiritual pure consciousness of the jiva is penetrated by this Mahatattva, and being endowed with the Kriya Shakti of Krishna, what happens? That ahankara is impelling the living entity to act in certain ways, in specific ways, which Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, the three modes of material nature. So, therefore, the false ego, whether it is the mind, the intelligence, the false ego, all of these have got the ability to influence and to make us act in certain ways because of being endowed with the Kriya Shakti or the active power of Krishna. And that active power of Krishna on the material platform is influenced by the three modes of material nature. That is how it acts. So these are some of the things which we can understand from today's verse. If anybody has any question or comment, we can discuss.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
In the material world, every living entity have a different consciousness, act differently. That we can understand because of the influence of three modes of material nature, how they associate. So my question is, in the spiritual world, so when we are living with Krishna, so everyone have clear consciousness, Krishna consciousness.
Yes.
So by what energy influence some jivas develop this ichha dvesha qualities that makes them to fall down to this material world?
Okay. What influences the living entity to develop that ichha and dvesha, because of which falls down to the material world, right? That is what Krishna says. Prabhupada says in the purport. We cannot argue about why. What causes false ego to arise from pure consciousness? Because that's the inherent nature of the living entity. That's called free will. So you cannot find a cause beyond that. That's the cause of all causes. Ichha dvesha samuttena sarge yanti parantava. Krishna said, original cause of our fall down is our ichha and dvesha. Now we cannot say what is the cause of that. There is no cause of that. Ichha is something which is natural to the living entity. To desire is the natural characteristic of a living entity. And a non-living entity cannot desire. A non-living entity cannot have dvesha. No, I don't want this, I want this. A piece of rock, a piece of steel, can it have possessed desires? No. This Prabhu is giving class, I don't want to amplify his voice. This Prabhu is giving class, I like to amplify his voice. So the first Prabhu comes and says the mic will not work. Second Prabhu comes, mic will work. Does it happen? No. It has no desire or dvesha. No ichha, no dvesha. So only a living entity can possess that ichha and dvesha. The devotee who is sitting and operating the mic, he can have a desire. This devotee I don't like. Reduce his mic volume. Keep it 0. I don't want to hear him. So that a living entity can do. He can have that dvesha. Right? But the mic itself, because it's dead matter, it cannot do anything. It cannot possess that desire or dvesha. It cannot have. So the fundamental characteristic of the living entity is to have ichha and dvesha. Now, when that living entity, he misuses his free will and uses that Ichcha and Dvesha to work against his Swarupa, to be an eternal servant of Krishna, then he becomes influenced by the illusion and he comes down to the material world. So there is no cause beyond that. That's why Prabhupada says we cannot argue why false ego arises from pure consciousness. Understood? That's the way it is.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
There are two categories of living beings. One is the Nitya Siddha and the other is Nitya Baddha.
Yes.
Nitya Siddha beings are the ones who are eternally situated in the spiritual abode in association with Krishna.
Yeah.
Nitya Baddhas are the ones who are conditioned in this material existence
Yes.
since time immemorial because of their anadi karma phala.
Yes.
So there is a risk of falling down from the spiritual world, like how you have said. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Yad gatva na nivartante taddama paramam mama.
Yes.
So this is applicable only to the jivas who go from the material existence to the spiritual world, or is it like they don't come back again to this material world once they reach the spiritual abode, is what Krishna is describing here.
Yes.
So how do we understand there is a thin line of difference in this, is what I'm
No,
trying
Nitya
to...
Siddhas also fall down.
Yeah.
Is that the
If
question?
there is a risk, then what is the impetus for a jiva to go back to the spiritual abode? I have risk, then why
I
should
may
I
again
go
fall
back?
down.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like this. Technically speaking, there are Nitya Siddhas, there are Sadhana Siddhas, there are Kripa Siddhas, and there are Nitya Baddhas. Okay? So what's the difference between all these three things? Nitya Siddhas are a different category. They are not Jivatmas. Nitya Siddhas are expansions of the Hladini Shakti of Krishna. Personalities like Yashodamai, Nanda Maharaj, the Gopis. So all these personalities, they are not Jiva Tattva. They are expansions of the Hladini Shakti of Krishna. And so therefore, they are Nitya Siddhas. They are a different category. They will never come under the influence of the three modes of material nature. They will never misuse their free will. They are just like Vishnu Tattva. Vishnu Tattva will never fall down, right? We understand that. That's his nature. He is beyond. He is the controller of the three modes of material nature. So there is no, and he is the enjoyer. So there is no question of his falling down because he is the enjoyer, he is enjoying. What is there for him to desire to enjoy independent of anybody else? He is the independent enjoyer. So similarly, the Nitya Siddhas, being of the category of Hladini Shakti of Krishna, they will never fall down. So personalities like Nanda Maharaj, Yashodamai, all the personal associates of Krishna, they all come from the category of Nitya Siddha. Now Jivas are a different category. So the Nitya Siddhas belong to the internal energy of Krishna. The Jivas belong to the marginal energy. So they are a different category. Now the characteristic of marginal energy or the Jiva is he has the propensity to misuse his free will and fall down to the material world, or to use his free will and remain in the spiritual world. That's why it's called marginal energy, Tatastha Shakti. The Antaranga Shakti will never fall down. So it is the unique characteristic of the Jiva or the Tatastha Shakti to be either under the control of the internal energy, Antaranga Shakti, or come under the influence of the Bahiranga Shakti. All right. Now, because the Jiva has that propensity, all of us living entities who are in the material world, at some point of time, we have misused that free will and we have come down to this material world. This is the reality. Now, once we go back to that spiritual world, Yad Gatva, once we go back to the spiritual world, we will become Sadhana Siddhas, or we can be Kripa Siddhas also. Like for example, Gajendra. Gajendra was delivered by the Kripa of Krishna. There is the dog who was it? Chandrasekhar Acharya? Shivananda Sena. That dog, because he got the Kripa of Shivananda Sena, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu delivered him. So dog, what a dog knows, what a dog is engaged in following the 64 regulative principles of devotional service, nothing. He got the Kripa of Shivananda Sena, got delivered. These are Kripa Siddhas. Sadhana Siddhas like Narada Muni and all these personalities, we also, if we follow our sadhana, Vaidhi Bhakti properly, come to the stage of Raganaga Bhakti, then go on to Bhava, then go on to Prema, then we will also become Sadhana Siddhas. So Sadhana Siddhas, when they go back to the spiritual world, they cannot become the immediate personal associates of Krishna. We cannot become yet another Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda Mai. There is only one Nanda Maharaj and one Yashoda Mai. We can become assistants, we can become servants to them. That is how Putana, when she got delivered by Krishna, what did she become? She lebhe dhatri uchitam. She obtained the position of mother of Krishna. Doesn't mean she became Yashodamai, no. But there is only one mother for Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan, which is Yashodamai. Dhatri uchitam. She became a nurse to Krishna, serving Yashodamai. Putana became a servant of Yashodamai, acting as a nurse for Krishna. So, position of mother means like mother, motherly position. So, all of the sadhana siddhas, when we go back to the spiritual world, according to our original position, our original rasa, our original relationship with Krishna, will become one of the servants of one of the personal associates of Krishna. All the personal associates of Krishna are expansions of the Hladini Shakti, they are all Nitya Siddhas. So, we will become servants to the Nitya Siddhas. Now, once and it is not that we do not have a original relationship with Krishna. When we go back to the spiritual world, in fact, even before going back to the spiritual world, when we come to the stage of Prema Bhakti, we will know, I am so-and-so person in the spiritual world and I have fallen into the material world. So, when in our next life, what will happen? We will take birth in one of the material universes where Krishna is performing his pastimes. There we go back as that personality, become more perfect. Then next life we go to the spiritual world. And once we go there to the spiritual world, we will always remember, this is how I was fallen into the material world and this is how I was delivered. Like Narada Muni, you see. Narada Muni, in his previous life, which was in the different kalpa of Brahma, so many billions of years ago, he still remembers how he was delivered. Clearly, without any, vagueness. Perfectly remembers what all happened, how his mother was bitten by a snake, how he was walking through all alone as a 5-year-old kid through the jungles, through the forests, through towns, through cities, big mines. He remembers everything. Such graphic detail he remembers. And then how he came to that water body and how he meditated, what he heard from Krishna. All these things he is able to remember graphically. So because when we go back to the spiritual world, we will remember that portion, how we got delivered. So we will know what was my experience in the material world. Just like a child, he wants to put his hand into the fire. He does not know what is the fire. Father will tell, no, don't do it. Child will go on insisting, no, I want to. Father will say, okay, go ahead and do it. So child will put the hand in the fire. It will burn. After that, whole life he will never put his hand into the fire. Ours is a similar condition. Krishna is giving ample instructions not to do it, but we still do it. Now we have burnt our finger. Now when we go back to the spiritual world, that experience of what the material world is will remain with us. We will not forget that. And so therefore, and we will remember who our spiritual master is. Our relation, that's why Janme Prabhu say, we sing about Prabhupada, that Prabhupada is our spiritual master, he is our Diksha Guru, he is the one delivering us. So even we go back to the spiritual world, we will remain indebted and we will remember our relationship with Prabhupada. So therefore, when we go back there, all these remembrances will still continue, and so therefore, we will be able to avoid again falling down to the material world. And that is why Krishna says, Yad Gatvan Nivartante Tadhama Paramamama. But fundamentally, essentially, whether we have the free will, whether we can still misuse that free will and again come back to the material world, that possibility is still there because that's our natural characteristic. We cannot take away our natural characteristic from us, no. That is inherent in us. We cannot separate that free will from the jiva. Because that's the characteristic of the Tatastha Shakti. You cannot separate that characteristic. But because of the remembrance of these experiences and the protection of Krishna in the form of his assurance and the protection of the spiritual master, we will not again fall down to the material world. This is how we have to understand. So Nitya Siddhas never fall down. That's the reality. Now, as far as the question whether living entities are constantly falling from the material world, no. Whoever had to fall down have already fallen down. And that itself is such a huge number, unlimited number. 1/4 of the entire creation, all of us are here. That is why we are called Nitya Baddha, because you cannot trace out when we fell down. We have fallen down and we have got stuck up here. This is the position. All right.
In that case, if my understanding is correct,
Yes, please.
this Nitya Baddhas can ascend by his spiritual practices either to Sadhana Siddha or to Kripa Siddha, but not become Nitya Siddha.
He cannot become Nitya Siddha.
But can he become Sadhana Siddha or
Yes.
Kripa Siddha?
Yes. The process which we are undertaking is to become a Sadhana Siddha. That is why we do sadhana. We engage in sadhana, Vaidhi Bhakti, then Raganuga Bhakti, under the shelter of a pure devotee. That's very important. I may do all my sadhana, but I have not accepted a pure devotee as my Diksha Guru. All that sadhana is useless. It will not work. So we have to do it under the direction of a pure devotee, spiritual master. Then that sadhana bhakti will take us to the point of becoming pure devotional service. Bhava Bhakti and then Prema Bhakti. Then we go back. We'll still remain Jivatmas only. We are still Tatastha Shakti only. Tatastha Shakti cannot transform into Antaranga Shakti. That's not possible. So we'll remain as Sadhana Siddhas. But Prabhupada says, once you become a Sadhana Siddha, on that platform of Sadhana Siddha, there is no difference between Nitya Siddha and Sadhana Siddha, because both of them are purely engaged in Krishna's devotional service in pure love. You understood, no? So, your loving devotional service to Krishna will be not different from the loving devotional service of a Nitya Siddha. Love is pure, completely. Love for Krishna is completely pure. There is no difference in that. So, in that sense, there is no difference between a Nitya Siddha and a Sadhana Siddha. But Nitya Siddha belongs to the Antaranga Shakti category. We belong to the Sadhana Siddha will belong to the Tatastha Shakti category. That will always remain. Is that clear? Yes, please. With one problem. Can you use the mic, please?
Acharyas, our 32 acharyas are there.
Yes.
In Parampara. Prabhupada is 32nd.
Yeah.
So just I wanted to understand little bit, like we have now heard about Nitya Siddha and Sadhana Siddha. So some how do we, these acharyas, they are all Nitya Siddhas, because when we say like Narad Muni,
He's a Sadhana Siddha.
He's a Sadhana Siddha.
Yes.
What about like our Prabhupada and other acharyas? Like any description like that, Prabhu?
So if we see the description in the Samsar Davan Leela prayers, Nikunja Yuno Retikeli Siddhyai Yayali Biruktir Apekshaniya Tatrati Dakshyad Ativallabhasya. My spiritual master is expert in assisting the gopis. And what are the gopis doing? The gopis are wanting to Nikunja Yuno Ratikeli. They are trying to make Radha and Krishna meet in the Nikunjas, gardens of Vrindavan. Right? This is what the gopis are engaged in. And my spiritual master is Daksha. He is expert in serving them in this matter. So, when we speak of a personality like that, that has to be a Nitya Siddha category. He is engaged directly in the service of Radha and Krishna. So, but then we see that in our parampara, there are personalities like Narada Muni, who is definitely a Sadhana Siddha. There is Brahma, who is a pure devotee, but not a liberated pure devotee. Prabhupada talks about in the 4th canto, how Brahma and Shiva are pure devotees, but not so liberated pure devotees. Meaning, they don't have permanent residence in the spiritual world. Although they are pure devotees, they have got a little independence. I want to do something for Krishna. So you see, that is also a very, very subtle, very, very fine independent desire. In the Goloka Vrindavan, all the Vrajabasis, what is their thinking? I want to please Krishna. What Krishna wants, I want to do that. Not that I want to please Krishna in a specific way like this. No. You understand? Krishna is pleased by eating the butter. So Yashodamai sits in engages in churning the curd to take out the butter. She is not thinking, I want to please Krishna by feeding him butter. That's not the way she is thinking. She is thinking, Krishna is happy by eating butter, so I'll make butter for him. You understood? There is a very, very subtle, very, very fine difference. Although Brahma is a pure devotee, Lord Shiva is a pure devotee, we are not on the platform to judge them. I am simply repeating what Prabhupada has said. So Brahma is a pure devotee, but not as liberated as the Brajavasis or the Nitya Siddhas. Narada Muni is a sadhana siddha. So all these kind of personalities are also there. So in the 32 acharyas in our parampara, are they Nitya Siddhas or are they sadhana siddhas or what are they? Whereas in our Samsardhan Leda prayers, we are every day singing that they are Nikunja Yunoratikeli. How do we understand this? So the fact is, from the time of Madhavendra Puri and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, from that point onwards in our line, whoever acharyas have come, they are all from that Nitya Siddha category. That is why Prabhupada in one letter writes, generally the spiritual master is from the Nitya Siddha category. So, after the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, all the personalities in our parampara, they are all Nitya Siddha category. Previous to that, they may have been sadhana siddha, they may have been pure devotees, but not so liberated. All those things are possible. Because ultimately, Krishna is the person who decides who can act as an acharya. And when such a personality comes, the predecessor acharya will order him, you become the next acharya. This is how the system works. So, Krishna, when Krishna is free, he is supremely independent. He can even take a Baddha Jiva and install him as an acharya, because Krishna is supremely independent. No, he is not under any rule and regulation. So that possibility is always there, provided Krishna makes an exemption like that. But generally, such exemptions will not come. Generally, Krishna will always send a Nitya Siddha or a pure devotee or a sadhana siddha. Krishna will designate him as a spiritual master. And that spiritual master will be ordered by the predecessor spiritual master to become the acharya. So therefore, you will see all kinds of personalities in our acharya parampara. But then, from the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu onwards, or from the time of Ishwara Puri and Madhavendra Puri himself, from that point onwards, they are all Nitya Siddha category. That's how we understand. Is that okay? So we'll stop here. Grantaraj Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai, Vishwaguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol.